Welcome to the Occult Rejects. We have a fantastic show planned for you. But before we get to the guest of honor, let's go around the room, go around the panel, and introduce each other. We'll start with the mad scientist up in the corner. Lisa, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Tim. I'm very excited to be here. Looking forward to Symbolic Studies. Mario's always giving so much knowledge to fill your brain to go on and ponder it some more. I'd like to plug the occultresearchinstitute.org. Some of our rejects contribute there, especially Ethan has contributed some, Jen has contributed some, Mario. And so if you could check us out there on occultresearchinstitute.org. Thank you.
Thank you. Jen, the ninja, how are you, sir?
Hey, Tim, what's up? So great to see you. Great job at this. I think it's hilarious that Nick makes people do this. I've done it once before, so I feel you. So I'm going to plug, obviously, my show, which is Threshold Saints. Tons of upcoming episodes this month and next month, literally 2 a week, maybe 3. So packed full. And also the Grey Lodge. So we have a Grey Lodge YouTube channel. We will be live streaming our Friday night Gnostic Mass, as well as our speculative ontology, speculative Gnostic series. We'll be starting to do that Friday night. So if you're interested, follow us on Twitter. You can follow me at Wukong Reborn, WUKONG Reborn, or at IG, or on the show account at Threshold Saints. And thank you to the panel, of course, Mario, who's also been super supportive of the Grey Lodge and the spaces. So, of course, had to pay homage. Thank you so much. And thank you, Nick, of course, for inviting me.
And of course, we have Nick. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm going to include you. So, hey, how's it going, Nick?
Very good. Thanks for coming on. My voice is still shot, which is why I have you doing the intro kind of too. But that is an idea. I think I'm going to start just making everybody doing the intros. I mean, we're all part of the show, right? Why not? So, Thank you very much for doing the intro. I really appreciate you always coming on, Tim, and Mario. It's always amazing to have you on the show. I always appreciate it. It's always magic. So the Occult Rejects, check us out. Thank you.
Thank you. Tyrone, what's up, man?
Welcome. Thank you for letting me come here. I appreciate it. It's always been great to be here with you guys. You can find everything about me on rebirthoftheword.com. Anything from my YouTube channel to my Spotify to just reading articles you'll find on there. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Headless Giant, what's up?
How's it going, everybody? You can find me on X at The Headless Giant and on Twitter at The Headless Giant. And if you have any sort of paranormal / weird dream stories, you can send them to my email at theheadlessgiantpodcast@gmail.com, and we will read those out on Thursdays. So check that out. Thank you.
Yeah, check that out. And we have Ethan Indigo. Ethan, what's up?
Honored to be here with you guys. Thanks for the involvement, Tim. Great job as the MC. Mario, I'm really excited about this and for your interpretations and sharing your knowledge and what a controversial subject it is. Headless and Ricardo and I have been doing a little podcast on Sundays. People have been giving positive feedback about. Otherwise, I'm a writer on the esoteric and the exoteric even, and I just enjoy sharing ideas with everyone. Thanks.
Sunday mornings, trialogues.
That's what I was going to ask about. Cool. And I am Tim Constantine. My show is Sixth Sensory Podcast. As always, happy to be here. I'm happy to kind of introduce everyone. That's awesome. Thanks, Nick, for asking me. And
thank you.
To our guest here, the main attraction, Mario from Symbolic Studies. How are you?
Hey, Tim. I'm pretty good, man. Thanks for the intro, and thank you for the invite, Nick, and setting this up, of course. Really excited to dive into all of this material with you. It is indeed controversial. So as I was writing my notes and kind of figuring out what I wanted to talk about, I'm like, wow, how am I going to talk about some of this stuff? But I think I have a game plan, and we'll plow through as a team here. But if people aren't familiar with my work, they can check out symbolicstudies.com. I'm all over the place. YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, things like that.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here and comment on that controversial element to this work. I know what you're talking about, but I do want to say, from my perspective, we're over here, we're kind of isolated in our isolationist culture in the West. And when we hear the term Aryan and stuff like that, we automatically think, many of us think about like movies like American History X, and we think about skinhead guys and neo-Nazis, etc. But that Aryan term in my research has nothing to do with any of that, and it comes from like the Magi priest class, Zoroastrian Iranian stuff. And I'll let Mario break all that down, but just want to jump in there and say that, like, let's just open our minds for this one tonight.
There you go. Yeah, right on. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I'm really glad you said that, because I have here written in my notes somewhere that the symbolism, the deep core symbolism that I want to talk about, has nothing to do with Hitler, has nothing to do with World War II. It completely predates all of that stuff, right? And so that is obviously part of the conversation here. The word Aryan is very interesting. And so there's a lot of things here that I want to discuss that completely predate anything that has happened over the last 100, 200 years. So that's a great thing just to point out right off the bat. So one of the things, I think the show was actually started because Nick was interviewing somebody. There was some conversation, maybe you guys remember at some point, but I know that World War II came up, and I believe either the swastika came up, Hitler came up, something along these lines. And I just commented in the chat, I was really digging the show, that's a whole episode. We could talk about this symbolically, right? And so Nick invited me on. And one of the things for me that I've always wanted to contribute to this conversation, and there's authors who have certainly done this before, is talk about the polar symbolism associated with the Nazi Party. And to me, it feels as though there was a strategic campaign to include this symbolism, to drag it through the mud, essentially, because it is powerful, powerful stuff. The swastika, just as an example, is such a primordial, important symbol. Some people say it's universal. It's damn near universal from what I can gather as well. So many cultures, you can find examples of the swastika all over the world. So what does that mean? And why would it be the perfect symbol to sort of tarnish or have a campaign against, right? And so if people have followed my work, one of the things I like to talk about is this great symbolic shift from polar to solar, basically, right? And polar symbolism is very primordial, very ancient. It very much relates to the last golden age, right? It relates to things like the North Star, the northern sky, the world axis or axis mundi. And so because I've gotten really interested in that information, it's really been something that I promote heavily, because I see that it unlocks a lot of transcendental truths, metaphysical truths. It really will take your symbolic awareness to the next level, in my opinion. So I feel like my early symbolic journey, I hadn't yet come across that material. And so I felt like, my sort of framework with symbolism, it just wasn't complete. I felt like I was lacking almost a foundation. And it wasn't until I found specific authors that talked about some of this stuff did I feel like I really found something that was giving me, structure, essentially. And this is basically traditional symbolism. And so traditional symbolism, to me, it really has a lot to do with unifying principles, unifying concepts, the concept related to the center, and the idea that everything is expressed from the center and returns back to that same center. Ideas and concepts related to non-duality, right? Related to hierarchy, and the center being the apex of a hierarchy, right? And so this symbolism, according to traditional perennial authors, right, this is all pervasive, because with this early tradition, this primordial tradition, it's been called, this is what precedes all other traditions. So all traditions sense basically are echoes or fragments of that tradition. So you will see aspects of it all over the place, right? And there's so many basic symbols that go back to this as well. So the tree, the world tree, right, as an example, the mountain, the world mountain, you know, the stone, the pillar or pole or post. That's going to be a huge one for today, basically, is discussing all of that. And what I found is that this symbolism has been demonized in the modern world, thanks in part to things like World War I and World War II and the affiliations, right? The people associated with it and the, you know, just the different sort of historical things associated with it. So to me, this is very interesting as well, because I'm starting to see, and I'm sure you guys have noticed this, and this has become kind of like a talking point among some people, is that sort of the programming from these world wars is in some way starting to break down for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, it's starting to shift, right?
Mhm.
And so people are starting, like Kanye West as an example, right? You know, he's using the swastika. He has chains, swastika chains and shirts and all this stuff. And so I'm not saying that's necessarily a positive thing or a negative thing. It just is what it is. It's things are being sort of reshaped and retooled right now. But this cultural breakdown is definitely part of the conversation. And you can't keep something like the swastika contained and suppressed for that long. Its power is too great. It's existed for such a long time that it's going to be known and it's going to be sort of understood. So
You know,
one of the
Mario,
things,
Mario,
go ahead,
real
man.
quick, I just wanted to say, I think I've said it before. I think that is actually one of the more, it's not calling the guy a gangster, but the fact that he took that symbol and fucked it off, that's a real magical. I mean, that is just fucking, it's crazy.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that, he had that power.
no, totally.
Well,
He took
I'd like
the
to-
N word. Go ahead.
I'd like to throw in just one thing. It seemed like it was forgotten for a long time in the West before he kind of revived it. Because you see, before, you know, the rise of Hitler and the Nazis, there was no real conception or popular consciousness around the swastika anymore. It had been a long sort of dormant symbol in that part of Europe for a long time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
Mario, if you want at some point, if you don't break down the swastika, I can break down how the Nazis got a hold of that if you want at some point. And I just wanted to comment on the swastika in general because I went out on a limb there in the intro and brought up that term Aryan. I just had a feeling we were going to talk about that. But what I was thinking when I used the term Aryan, I was definitely thinking about the swastika. And I don't know how far back it goes. You probably know more about that than I do, but I've read that it goes back to at least goes back to the ancient Zoroastrian cults of Iran. And that's why in 1935, Iran actually changed their name to Iran, which means Aryan, because they were trying to reconnect with those Aryan roots. But you go back to like King Darius of the old Persian Empire, and on his tomb it says son of a Persian, son of Aryan race. And all these guys were using that swastika. So I'm interested in how far it goes back.
There's only two current states in the world that use Aryan as the root for the name of their country. That would be Iran, and who can guess the other one? Ireland.
Oh yeah,
Iran and Ireland.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, you know, the way I see it is that like I said before, like this concept of a center being the point of expression and also return, right? This is really, this is the basis of my metaphysical understanding of all things, basically. And so it permeates everything. Nothing can sort of escape this concept, in my opinion, from what I've gathered now. And what I've noticed is a lot of words that are R, AR, IR, as Headless just mentioned with Ireland, and all go back to a northern primordial kind of original dynamic, pretty much. So like one of the things, the Arctic, right? AR, right? King Arthur, he's like a northern king. Ursa Major, right? The northern constellation, which is very much related to the swastika. So humanity, almost across the board, when you dig deep enough into the esoteric symbolism, it seems as though so many cultures have this concept of a northern origin story. And actually, it's interesting. I have a book here called The Arctic Home in the Vedas.
Baal Talik.
Yep, exactly. So the Arctic home in the Vedas, right? And so just the first sentence here, the idea of a lost ancient civilization located at the North Pole, right? And so when I was in India a little over 10 years ago, and there was one small town. I don't know, I can't even remember the town anymore. But there's lots of taxis. I've told this story before, so if you've heard it, my apologies. But there was lots of little taxis around, and walking around waiting for a taxi or finding where we're going to go. It was really interesting to see that a lot of these taxis had gigantic, bold red stickers on them, and they all said Aryan, and they all had a red swastika right next to it. And then the little bookstore outside for tourists had Mein Kampf there. And so that was a revelation for me at the time, where I'm like, whoa, Mein Kampf is right here. And then all of these people are claiming this Aryan thing with the swastika, because this idea of our homeland being in Hyperborea or paradise or the original Garden of Eden, it's so ancient that I don't think we can really escape it. I think it goes through waves in ways where people sort of rediscover it, have this kind of identification with it, right? But it just goes back to what I was saying. Emanation from the center, also return back from the same center. And so humanity had this sort of origin story. All of humanity, in my opinion. It's kind of no different. I've been thinking a lot about antennas and just like a simple pole emitting a signal, right? It emits from the middle and it expands outward. It's not unlike a ripple, right? You throw a pebble in a pond, it ripples out from the center, right? And so the signal is strongest the closest it is to that pole, and then it gets weaker and weaker and weaker, right? And so humanity, in my opinion, has had this fall from grace from this center, and sort of the further we've either literally physically migrated away. I've been thinking a lot about nomadic symbolism and how that's the root for all humans, basically, is this perpetual travel. And when you're thinking about that, by the way, according to what I've looked into, the vast majority of nomadic migrations are from south to north and then back again, not east to west, right? So you're literally going to the north. So it's almost like a symbolic pilgrimage, basically, in many ways, right? And so humanity seemingly has migrated away from the north. And I think this is encoded in a lot of different storylines as well, right? Go ahead.
I was going to say that there's something about the northern symbolism that is so intrinsic to all of these stories that really doesn't get attention. If you go back to the Greeks, they talk about the separation of Uranos, the sky, from the earth. And they talk about castrating the pole, right? Yep. So the pole is that symbol that separates the sky from the earth, and that would be at the northernmost climes, right? So This is where the original sky came away from the earth, and so that's sort of like invisible pole is sort of present in that symbolism as well.
100%.
If I may, when you was talking about India, I went back and brought up one of the daily mythology drops that I put on my X account every now and then. Every single day I do a daily mythology drop, and one of them was the swastika. And I learned that in Hinduism, the swastika represents Surya. I guess that's how you say it, Surya, which is the sun god, which is prosperity and good fortune. So, we had it at one time a good thing, and then, most people know it as the negative connotation as it is today with the Nazism and so on and so forth. But it's interesting. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, to back that up, one of the world's oldest religions is Jainism, related to Hinduism. And it is first and foremost in there. Every book must have a swastika in the beginning page, and at every temple entrance there must be a swastika as well. Did I come through clearly?
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's interesting.
I wanted to
say that because. Go ahead. Finish off. Go ahead.
Sorry. I'm delaying. I apologize, you guys. And also, it really has, and maybe Jim might be able to build on this better than I don't mean to put you on the spot, but it also really has the center point, as you point out. It has two lines intersecting, which results in the four corners, which results in the four directions and four corners of this mandala-like formation that it kind of illustrates, and related to the sun and so forth, and seasonal changes, as you point out.
Right,
That's
right.
a that's a
Yeah, and
sorry,
not
Mario. I'm just gonna jump in really quick after Ethan, just because he brought up something really interesting about Jainism. Is that Jains do have a deep tantric system as well. They also have a lot in common with certain Temple of Set ideas in terms of self belief and like self apotheosis. That is also part of Jainism, and it's in general considered to be one of the wealthiest diasporas religions in the world, and they also control a big part of the diamond trade. So, and they also control all religious iconographical publishing of Indian deities ad hoc. So, especially in the 70s, like when people think of Hinduism, they think of those like shiny lithographs with like holograms. Those were all done by Jain publishing companies. So it was Jains who kind of incorporated the, if you want to call it, Kabbalistic sort of coloring elements of the gods and the goddesses. So there's something really interesting with Jainism and what everybody's saying. There is kind of something very primordial, very old, and a lot of the ideas, both in tantric Buddhism particularly, but also in modern magic, like the idea of sky flying or sky dancing, like the Digambara Jains, they would go sky clad. That's the word I was looking for. I'm sorry. So like Wiccans use that word, like sky clad, and obviously that comes from Jainism. It's a kind of a corruption of the idea, but there's a lot of Jainic tantric ideas, I think, in modern times.
No, I agree with you. So I'm gonna jump in here real quick because this is interesting because I had already put up my mythology drop. So I did India already and talked about how it was related to the sun god. And Jainism is actually under there. I highlighted it. Stands for the seventh saint, Supar Shavanta. And so this is what I want to give people an idea. So when I do these daily mythology drops, I usually take lots of my books and I have a lot of tabs on my books that I take information from. So that way it's not my opinion, my theory, or my idea. I'm actually taking it from different texts and I'm trying to put it into a consolidated format so everybody can get the basic gist of what it's basically been saying. So that's why I created that. And it's funny that y'all was mentioning Jainism because in prehistoric Europe, the swastika appears on pottery, runestones, and textiles. Now I also went and backed up somebody was saying about the I think in the comments somebody was saying something about the oldest swastika could be found in Ukraine, and I actually found two websites that I like to go to that actually brings that up. And here I'll bring it up if Nick can bring it up real quick. But it does go back to 12,000 years, and it gives you a history of it on ancient-origins.net. Now, there's other websites that I went to that said the same thing, but this was, this one gave you a good breakdown, and you can listen to, the little article that they have on there, and it literally gives you, the different ways how the Druids did the swastika at one time. They give you in the 12,000 year symbolism. It gives you a little idea of, I guess it's found on some kind of uncovered in Mizin, Ukraine, carved on an ivory figurine, which dates back an incredible 12,000 years. One of the earliest cultures that are known to have used the swastika was a Neolithic culture in Southern Europe in the area that is now Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, and Herzegovina, known as the Vinca culture, which dates back around 8,000 years ago. So I mean, that's pretty interesting that somebody put that in the comments because I went immediately to look at it. So we going back at least 12,000 years with this information.
Yeah. So
and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The other thing is I wanted to say it's just like with mythologies. You see how one myth was told in a traditional oral story 12,000 years ago, and now we have the Holy Bible that everybody believes in today. It's the same thing with this, is that they took the swastika and meant one thing back then. The sun god, I actually wrote an article on that. The first representation of a god is a sun because of the agricultural needs and everything else.
Yeah, so I'm trying to swing it around and take it back to Mario here, but I do want to say, like, if you look at where we're talking about empire lineage here, I think, and you guys talked about the Hindus and if you look at the Brahma, some of the Brahma families, they came from the Caucasus Mountains. There's DNA tests that prove that, as did the Scythians, and the Ukraine people come out of there. So if you go back, you've got, I want to go back to this UR, IR, AR thing that Mario broke down that goes back to a civilization in the north. Well, you've got the Chaldees, which was an ancient city. You've got Uruk, the city of Gilgamesh. So if you look at that, you've got before Babylon, there were the Chaldeans. Before them, I would argue Sumerians. Before them, Aryans. Before that, Atlanteans? Question mark. Are you know what I'm saying? Like, are we going back, Mario, to an actual civilization in the north?
It seems as though there's something to that. Yeah, definitely. I look at this place more like a field, right? And so it's like a tourist field. So I kind of see it that we're existing on a plane, perhaps within literally this torus field dynamic, right? And so the torus field is another example of this emanation from the center and return back to that same center. And so it seems as though all things come from a center of some sort. A tree, as an example, emanates from a seed, right? And so the north is symbolic of this exact same center. And so northern symbolism, polar symbolism, axial symbolism, traditional primordial symbolism, it's very much all the same thing, in my opinion. And like the preeminent sort of symbol we have of this in the heavens, at least, would be, in my opinion, the North Star, the pole star, because this is really where this they refer to it as the world axis, as I've already mentioned, but you can refer to it as like the interstellar axis as well. It's literally this symbolic cosmic pole that exists between all realms above and below, basically, right? So from the North Pole to the North Star, aka the pole star, it's called the pole star for a reason. And so all of the fixed stars go around the pole star, right? Including the stars of the zodiac. And I'd like to segue just briefly to this idea of the sun. In my opinion, what I've learned in traditional symbolism, the sun, solar symbolism, is actually subordinate and younger than polar symbolism. So that's a really important distinction, that solar symbolism is more of a modern thing, actually, in the grand sort of scheme of things, basically, right? And so I actually have some quotes about that. And this relates back to the swastika, by the way. And I do have some slides that we should share with the swastika in just a minute. But before that, I have a pretty good symbolic library. And so I've been collecting symbolic dictionaries from like 2006 or 7. And I've just been buying up everything that I can see, whatever. So I have all of these different books. I can look up the sun in like, dozens of different books. And I've done stuff like that. That's how I get a lot of my research personally. And what I've noticed is that a lot of newer books associate the swastika with solar symbolism. And to be honest with you, that never sat well with me. It just never made sense personally. Well, that was before I knew that there was this great shift from polar to solar. So there are solar deities that were once known as being polar deities. You'll actually find that a lot of solar sun gods actually have a relationship with the North Pole or Hyperborea, that their origin story is somewhere in the north, right? And so there are a lot of deities from ancient cultures that were actually polar in nature, but modern people basically misinterpreted the symbolism and put a solar sort of dynamic. So it wasn't until I found higher quality authors did I start reading about the true origins of the swastika actually being a polar symbol, not a solar symbol. Polar or solar symbolism comes from polar symbolism. So the sun symbolically is also a pole, believe it or not. And so on modern versions of the sun card, as an example in the tarot, oftentimes, like in the Rider-Waite, you will see a young boy holding a huge pole with a flag on it, because the sun has become the symbolic pole for a lot of people. It's become, if you're a heliocentrist, you're basically saying that the sun is the center. The sun is the point of pivot. So symbolically, the sun itself also has polar symbolism associated to it, with it. So again, polar symbolism is at the apex of the hierarchy. Solar symbolism came afterwards and is more subordinate. There was a time before solar worship. There was a time before the sun had everyone's focus, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And there's so many examples of this. But one of the things I'll say about axis symbolism and pole symbolism, it is the bridge between heaven and earth, right? And so we also are axis symbols. We operate as a bridge between heaven and earth. This has been referred to as the Great Triad. that there's a triune relationship between heaven, earth, and man. We are that symbolic bridge, as is a tree, as is a lot of things. A pillar, the pillar or a pillar in a building symbolically separates heaven and earth, right? And so it separates and it connects. This is what you'll see in the magician card. The magician holds up a wand. Phallic symbolism is polar symbolism, is world axis symbolism as well. Holding up that wand to the heavens, and then he's pointing his other hand down to the ground, as above, so below. He's basically saying, I connect heaven and earth, and I also separate heaven and earth. It's the same dynamic, right? This world axis.
Mario,
and when you really go for it.
Have you heard of the Path of Souls religion talked about by a lot of Mayan documenters in North America?
No, Path of Souls? Mm-mm.
It refers to this northern symbolism as the way out.
Yes, exactly.
So this is what you get in Egypt too. And so the idea is it's a transference of how you get out of this realm from the polar, being the northern, climes, to bean the sun.
Right.
And
yeah, exactly.
The
Isn't
great
that the
solar
idea
cross.
The idea that there's an actual spot in the north where you can descend through the atmosphere or something, and it aligns with the North Star, perhaps. Yeah,
it's referred to. The most common way to refer to it is the stairway to heaven. Yeah, exactly. So the stairway to heaven, exactly. So this is the opening in the cave. That's another sort of way of looking at it. In Royal Arch Freemasonry, it's the keystone. Right. So the keystone is removed. And so, yeah, exactly. So, in my opinion, the North Star, there's debate whether or not the North Star shifts or doesn't shift. Some people now are convinced that it's never shifted and it's always been the same. If it shifts or doesn't shift, it almost doesn't matter. If it shifts, however, what I've learned is that some people say that it's actually a title, that the pole star is more so a title, almost like a king. The king receives the title and receives the throne, but it's not the same king perpetually, right? And so the North Star is almost like a role that's always been fulfilled by the star closest to that axial spin, right, of the fixed stars going around that point of pivot. And so when you really dive deep into world axis symbolism, like if you look at the name is escaping me now, but there's different myths about the primordial universe being in chaos, and that all of the elements were basically fused together. And it wasn't until the world axis came to be was there actually separation between heaven and earth. So then actually they became, or there now was space for things to grow and whatever, mix and divide and all that kind of stuff, right? Ovid's Metamorphoses. There's one of the first plates, it's called the Chaos. That's basically what the chaos is all about. Everything amalgamated sort of together in this heap until the world axis brought structure and brought order. This chaos is also related to the Fool card. The Fool always has a bag with him generally at the end of a pole. The pole is so significant with the Fool card. And it's been said that there's the elements in that bag, but everything was mixed together. So in the Fool card, you have chaos, and then that's followed by the Magician card, which is order. So then you actually have the elements displayed on the table, organized on the table, right in front of the magician. So order out of chaos, right? The world axis brings order because it brings a point of pivot. So let me just finish this thought real quick. So all leaders symbolically represent the axis, right? The leader of any organization represents the pole, the point of pivot for that organization, right? You're giving orientation to your people. That's what it represents. I did a breakdown like 2 months ago on my channel called Death in Taurus, and it was about the passing of the Pope and the ushering in of this new Pope. And I broke down all the symbolism about how the Pope is a symbolic axis, or he's a symbolic pole, right? And so if it's the point of orientation, if it's the point of pivot, if it's what you look towards for guidance, right, spiritual guidance and whatnot, it all makes sense, in my opinion. So if the Pope is traveling, in a vehicle, everyone's eyes go towards the Pope because he's a walking mobile axis, basically. And there's even some traditions, like my understanding is in Islam, Imam actually has a relationship with pole itself, like with axis, right? And there's actually a lot of polar symbolism in esoteric Islam and in Sufism, which I think is super, super interesting and fascinating.
Even in mainstream Islam, they're making the somnambulations around the central mountain, right? So there's a lot of polar symbol in all of it, but it's kind of hard to parse unless you know it.
Yeah, exactly right. So,
well, let me just say one thing. Sorry, Mario, about what
yeah.
Headless just said, because the sort of expression of it in Islam is actually understandable from a tantric perspective. The black cube is that of Rahu. It's very clear in the Garuda Purana that is the stone of Rahu. It also has the 7 yonis encased in silver. This is also part of the Yogini Tantras. So that it's not polar what the Islam is actually referring to. It's actually solar. It's solar mixed with Saturnian. It's both of those sort of in dialectical relationship. So I just wanted to say that. But sorry, Mario, go ahead.
Oh, no worries.
That makes sense for the age, too.
May I ask you a question, Mario? Have you read Albert Churchward's Signs and Symbols? Because everything that you're talking about, I literally learned in this book right here.
No, I haven't read that. I actually think I do have it, though.
Yeah, it actually on page 187, which is funny, 187, and the murder and all this other stuff, how the murder number is used. But
it makes sense for polar symbolism.
Yeah, that's why I brought it up, right? But it literally says, and I'll read it out. It says that this sign of the swastika was found in Britain 3000 BC until 300 AD, will prove pretty conclusively that the time of the exodus of the Druids from Egypt was at the time they had the swastika, after they have converted this from the figures of the 4 quarters, and before they had changed the same into the Ankh cross by evolution, probably more than 20,000 years ago, if Flinders Petrie is right in his dates as to his discoveries at Abydos. Then it goes on and it says, thus we see how one from the cross now used amongst the Christians. So he's saying that originated directed from the sacred symbol of the swastika. So the cross and the swastika have a relationship. And I'm literally, it's right here. If anybody wants to read it for themselves, it's in the book that says that.
May I say something that's blowing my mind, and I hope you guys find it valuable too, a relationship between Mario, what you're presenting, and something I've been thinking about from Buddhist teaching. And firstly, though, more primarily, the heaven, earth, and man symbolism, I think, is very much distinct in the great initiator that is Thoth, or Hermes Trismegistus. And this is what he has mastered, these 3 levels of being. And in many different cultural kind of self-development systems, we can find that orientation of this trinity. But something that blew my mind is what you were talking about, how the north and the pole is seen as the way to ascend and rise up and rise out. What I'm always thinking about, the exoteric or the primary teaching, whether it's an esoteric teaching, regardless, but the esoteric aspect of a pole in relation to this rising out of a cave and rising up, well, that's a tube. And there's a Buddhist teaching that says you're kind of stuck in a tube and you're going to be ascending or descending, or maybe going back and forth, which I think in our average human development that we do go back and forth.
That's the migration pattern he talked about. He said you go to the north and then you descend back down.
Right. And in terms of self-development, we want to ascend. Sometimes we go back and forth. Sometimes we don't know which way to go. And in fact, we start out as a tube. We don't start out as a heart. We start out as a digestion tube. And of course, we come out of the great matrix and womb tube. So as you're describing the pole and that aspect of self-development and rising up, I was thinking, oh, well, the esoteric aspect of the pole is the tube. Thank you for letting me share that.
Yeah, if I may, when you was mentioning the Pope, this is a picture of my 1873 Bible. This is the oldest book that I own. It's from 1873 in this condition. It's a really interesting book. I'm slowly going through it and sharing what I have on there. And it's interesting that you mentioned about the Pope, because in my 1873 Bible, if I was born in that time frame and I wanted to go to a store to buy a Bible, this would probably be the Bible that I would buy, right? And it has the Apocrypha in there. And it says Abaddon, the Hebrew term for the destroyer, the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in Greek is Apollon. From the occurrence, and then it tells you the scriptures and the rabbins. But see, this is what it says. It says, some have applied the name to Satan exclusively. Others also apply to Mahomet, others to the Pope of Rome.
Mm-hmm.
It's Apollyon. It's, well, I don't know how many rabbit holes we want to go down here. I don't even know if I want to go down that rabbit hole, but it's Apollyon. And it's, it's been conflated with Semyaza and Azazel and many of these other ancient, entities that sort of live and reside across multiple different panels. But so, Mario, you said that like solar symbolism comes from polar symbolism.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
So what was going on in the sky then? Does that say something about the astrology of the ancient world? Were there multiple suns?
Electric universe?
That's a great question. The way I'll present it, well, one, I have a presentation called The Rising Sun, Esoteric Solar Symbolism. If people really want my full sort of take on that, definitely watch that presentation. I think it's one of my best. And I talk about how solar symbolism comes from polar symbolism, essentially. And basically, the way I break it down is that there have been 3, from what I gather, symbolic major sky clocks. In today's world, it's the path of the sun, which is the ecliptic. So people are paying attention to the constellations around the ecliptic, right? So 12 or 13 based on your system. And so prior to that, or it almost seems as though there's like an intermediary phase. I'm still figuring out the ways in which to kind of word this. But undoubtedly, people were looking towards, and still do, towards the moon as a timepiece, a timekeeper, right? So the lunar sky clock, and a lot of religions still use the lunar calendar for their holy days, right? Well, from what I've gathered, based on my research, according to some of these traditionalists and perennialists, the first sky clock, the most primordial sky clock, was actually the fixed stars going around the pole star. And so we're dealing with a stellar tradition, right? And so the fixed stars go around the pole star counterclockwise. And what I've mentioned before is that when we're dealing with rotation, just like with the Kaaba cube, I've brought it up on this channel before, but like circumambulation rituals, right? Going around a point of pivot. If the object is around, or if you're revolving around an object and it's on your right-hand side, that's a clockwise rotation. Symbolically, a clockwise rotation, just like the sun goes clockwise, just like our standard clock, the faces of a clock, because we're dealing with a solar tradition in today's world with heliocentrism. A clockwise rotation is expansive, and a counterclockwise rotation is actually contractive. It brings you closer to the center. It brings you closer to the point of emanation of all things. It brings you closer to the pole itself. A clock itself can't even operate with that axis right there in the middle. It's as well. No matter how, if you're talking about new clocks or you're talking about old clocks, it's just, you just need a pole, right? And then it's going to tell you the time based off of the shadow of the sun and everything. Go ahead, Headless.
Victor Schauberger talks about those two different directions as being explosive versus implosive force.
There you go.
And so the implosive force is what creates 0 point energy, because it's constantly imploding upon itself like a tornado. This is the secret of the polar symbolism, is that is where you find that infinite energy point.
Yeah, and I see.
If I may interject really quickly, sorry about that.
No, you're good.
That I think also, and Tyrone mentioned it and it jarred a memory, is that the universe creates in pairs. And so we constantly talk about polar symbolism. We talk about pole star, pole star, pole star. And somewhere in the text, it's always mentioning the cross. Yet no one remembers to, mention the Southern Cross, which is the Southern Pole. In that, in the Northern Hemisphere, because the countries have basically dictated and ruled over the most of the Earth, is that we concentrate mainly on the North Pole star as our navigation point, as kind of sensing directions. But in the southern hemisphere, they use the Southern Cross as their way of navigation, the way that the northern hemisphere uses the North Pole. And when you look at the Southern Cross, it pretty much looks like a cross. And so when you kind of look into occultism of what the cross is, you almost look at the cube cross, which is the tesseract. And the tesseract itself is basically transcending time and space to, I guess, quantumly move within areas. So I just wanted to interject that I thought that would be important to mention.
Sure, and that's a whole
was great,
conversation
Lisa.
can be had about the southern hemisphere, Antarctica, the psyope nature of some things that are going on there, the Nazi interest in Antarctica, the final experiment with the flat Earth community and stuff like that going down there. So yeah, that's a whole conversation. And
It's
so
the one thing every country on Earth agrees on is that nobody should go down there without their specific intrusion. So
did they
Yeah,
agree
come
on
on.
that, or did we
That's interesting.
compel them to agree on that?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Something I just wanted to add this in real quick. I've been wanting to say it for a minute. It's just kind of minor. You're talking about like stars spinning around a pole. The maypole was actually a big thing to be taught to the SS kids.
Yeah.
So I do kind of think like that does look a little bit like spinning stuff. I'll even say there's been times I've wanted to use that. Like when we spoke about making that image, I've even thought of using a maypole as a way to explain it, like seeing all these things spiraling out of that eclipse. Well, like if you looked under the maypole and watched it from the ground, it might look like that. So I've even wondered that type of shit for symbolism as well.
Oh yeah. No, exactly. Yeah, there's a ton of traditions that go around a pole. The maypole is one of them. I know in voodoo, there's another pole. It's called the peristyle, I think, and they look at it as like the navel of the universe, basically, right? So no matter where you're at, even if you're in the furthest extreme south, in my opinion, it's still subordinate to the center that it expanded from or was expressed from. That's just my opinion. But what I was building up to is basically the leader being an axis, being a bridge. The full title of the Pope is Pontifex Maximus, and that means the ultimate bridge builder. So he is a bridge between heaven and earth, right? And so for the Germans, Hitler was an axial figure. He was an axis. He was a pole, right? He was supposed to be the point of pivot for his people. He was going to be the point of orientation for his people. He's the leader. So all leaders literally sort of imbue this axial symbol and this bridge between heaven and earth, right? Explaining. And so to me, that's so interesting because also they use the swastika, which is also an axial symbol. It's symbolic of the spin of heaven, of all spin, really. My personal opinion is Earth is not spinning. That's an inversion. The heavens are spinning above, right? And so they're using an axial world axis symbol in the swastika, and they're referred to as the Axis versus the Allies, the axis of evil, right? Now, also very interesting that they invaded Pole land, right? And so it's kind of embedded all over the place with all of this stuff. And so to me, a huge thing about this too is that a leader is an axis, including a evil, nefarious leader. And so like the Lord, as an example, Lord symbolism has a lot of axial symbolism baked into it, but so does the Dark Lord as well. It's the same axis symbolism. The devil in the devil card oftentimes is squatting on top of like a pedestal, right? That's kind of like his primordial center, right? It looks very much in some cards like the Rider Waite. It kind of looks like the monolith from 2001, or it looks even like the Kaba cube, right? And so the axis symbolism translates whether you're talking about a positive or a negative figure. And then now I think it's really fascinating. Iran has been brought up a few times, and now Iran is the new axis of evil. And so, and they've got clear polar symbolism, baked into a lot of what they do. And so, to me, it's very strategic. It feels like it's a deliberate campaign once again to suppress this symbolism. because it's too holistic, it's too unifying. So yeah, so
Right.
let's get to this.
There's another angle right there, is that the trickster spirit is always a northern spirit. That is a constant I found in a lot of mythology, is that this trickster is a northern polar deity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
I found the same thing.
Mario, the Nazis during their reign acknowledged Iran as being their brothers, essentially.
Mhm.
Hitler himself said they're like a potent form of the Aryan bloodline, and they're our brothers. But I just want to comment on where the Nazis perhaps got that symbol from. There's a good chance that they got it from a guy who was a Sufi Eastern mystic, who was also spent time in Turkey, who was part of the Turkish Freemasonry scene there. It's a guy named Sabbatendorf. So, because the Nazis got the symbol from the Thule Society,
Mhm.
which was started by Walter Neuhaus and Rudolf von Sabbatendorf. Those guys were these German occultists. They were in about 10 other orders. They were Freemasons, German Norden of the Holy Grail. They were Rosicrucians, alchemists. They were in everything. So they took all those influences and amalgamated them into this Thule Society. Well, the Thule Society goes on to sort of sponsor and branch off and become the German Workers' Party, which becomes the Nazi Party. So Hitler and the Nazis simply kept the symbol. The Thule Society had already introduced it, and they came in and they straightened out the edges, because the Thule had the edges of the swastika bent a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
They came in, they straightened out the edges, kept the symbol. Hitler himself, from what I've read and what I've researched, all he did was add the red and the white and black. And they did this with the Thule's. The Thule Society had an occult newsletter. I think it was called the Beobacher. The Nazis kept that as well, and they turned it into the Nazis' party's main newsletter, or newspaper that went out. So I just want to break that down. But I think possibly Sabbatendorf got it from some of these influences that came down from this Magi, this the Persian Aryan Magi priesthood bloodline cult.
Hey,
thing.
Tim.
Yes.
Tim, do you get the sensation that the Nazis were kind of like the German form of the Mormons? There's this magical influence sort of bubbling up from the bottom and then spreading out into these different sort of normified symbols.
I do, absolutely. I mean, it would take me a whole episode to break it down, but I agree with that for sure. For sure.
It's like there's ancient magician orders that sort of come to the surface in these different movements from time to time.
That's what it is, and that's why I brought up Iran earlier, because of this Persian Aryan Magi group, Zoroastrian, all that stuff. They're all kind of a part of that. And I think in the book that Mario held up, that book is by Bal Talik, I think. I think he talked about how this whole Persian Aryan bloodline thing too. But yeah, it goes back to these basically these secret orders that had this information to begin with.
Yeah, and this
really quickly, I just want to insert the addition of the red, black, and white. I believe Jen and Nick, please correct me if I'm wrong. Those are the color stages of the great work, isn't it, in alchemy? Those are the actual 3 stages of when converting whatever it is that you're working on to the different phases to ultimately get you to the magnum opus great work in alchemy.
Negrito and Rubido. That's correct.
Albedo.
No, Albedo is
black
white.
and white.
Rubido is the red. She's talking about the black and red. But yeah, albedo is also
Black,
white.
red, and white.
Yeah.
No, you're totally right, Lisa. That was a great observation.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Just real quick, just because I brought it up, or I opened it and grabbed it here, but I don't have too many Iranian esoteric books, but I have this one, The Man of Light, and it's by Henry Corbin, The Man of Light in Iranian Sufism. And in it, they talk about Sufis meditating on the world axis and like gaining enlightenment and stuff like that. But if you open it, the first image here, literally, you're going to see Ursa Major and Minor. right? So it's just showing you how significant that is. It's literally the first image in the book when you open it up, right? So I see this as potentially some authors, like this guy named W.H. Mueller, in his book Polaria, he talks about how he thinks that the great wars of the world are essentially esoterically between solar and polar factions, pretty much.
Can I get a date on that book?
On Man of Light?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So let me see here.
While you're looking for that, I wanted to add, Tim, you mentioned Iran kind of like, using the swastika and, Nazi party. We also saw that popping up at the Azov battalion over in Ukraine. So, I mean, this thing keeps on popping up every time there's a war.
Yo.
So if
Where
we're
did
looking
the Visigoths? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, just real quick, I was just going to say that, if we're talking about solar versus polar orders, right, factions, right, deep esoteric factions, I think it's very interesting that the Nazis had the swastika, the reverence for the swastika, clearly a pole, a point of pivot, right? And then the Jews also are well known for their twin pillars, like in front of Solomon's temple, right? And in Freemasonry and in esoteric Judaism and things like that. So literally it can be broken down as like the single pillar order versus the dual pillar order, the twin pillars, right? And so to me, it's really interesting as well. I was in this camp, so I'm not throwing shade at anybody, but a lot of people in the modern esoteric world, they will spend a lot of time studying and researching the two pillars, Boaz, Jachin, solar, lunar, whatever. But a lot of times they will never study the single pillar. And when you study the single pillar, it's polar, essentially, is what it all breaks down to, in my opinion.
Well, Mario, if I could interject, we're talking about a type of energy. Am I right? Like, you can feel this stuff when you interact with it, but it's not really clear to the audience unless they have an extended interaction with these symbols to know what that feeling is. So I want to ask you, what is the feeling you get? I would call it vril, right? So vril coming from that polar symbol. You've studied it for a long time. I'm sure you can identify the emotions and things like that associated with it in yourself.
Yeah, I think vril is appropriate. I just think of unity, supreme unity. I think of the middle path, the middle way, the internal journey. Being concerned with what's happening more so locally and within versus without. To me, one of the greatest ways I can break it down is polar symbolism brings a vertical orientation, this axis between the above and below. And to me, in my opinion, solar symbolism has brought about a horizontal orientation where everything's completely flattened out, right? And so I think that was one of the big distinctions here between these things. But if you show the first slide, if you don't mind, whoever's controlling the deck here, it's just the standard swastika that you're going to find associated with the Nazis. And one of the things that did happen as well is that it forms more of an X than a cross, right? It's tilted slightly, right? But it's clear that this looks like it's supposed to be moving. And in my opinion, when we're talking about movement, again, it goes back to the movement of the heavens. I think that that's perhaps the greatest, most transcendental sort of symbolic example that we have. So the movement of all things, again, around this interstellar axis. And we can go to the next slide here, and it's just a quote from Rene Guénon.
Mario, real quick, there's that triskelion element to the tilted swastika that I think, if people look into the triskelion, they see it's the three sides and it's in that sort of motion kind of thing. And you've only got two flags of the world that have the triskelion on it, which would be Sicily and the Isle of Man. And both of them are legs.
Yeah. May I say, to your point about the pole and then it being flattened like a field, I looked up the etymology or meaning of Poland, and it means people of the field. So pole there is field. Just interesting.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, totally.
If the swastika is meant to convey motion and movement, I'm still kind of thinking about this idea of vril being associated with it. Like, that's very interesting to me. And I just want to point out that, like, from what I understand, the concept of vril really came about through Edward Bullard Lytton, who was a part of that group of the Thule Society. Like, they were all in the same kind of occult circle, like with Sabatendorf and even Blavatsky. But I just want to point out that I think this symbol, like we've presented today, in my mind, we've presented that the symbol's going back to a much, much older culture, and it's just the secret societies and the mystery schools sort of carrying it along and passing it along like a baton.
Yeah, and I would love to circle back around to Vril, because there's a lot to chew on with that for sure. So about the swastika, Gwenon says in his book, Fundamental Symbols, in my opinion, this is one of the greatest symbolic books you can get your hands on in the modern world. The swastika is essentially the sign of the pole. It would seem that in modern Europe, its true significance has never been made known. Most often, it is made out to be a solar sign, exactly what I said earlier, and exactly my hunch as well. So when I read this, it blew my mind, which it could only have become accidentally and in a rather indirect way. And he has other quotes too about, again, polar symbolism being truly primordial and solar symbolism being subordinate. So if you want to go through the next slide, we were kind of already on that, but you can see all of the different sort of variations. So the fact that the Nazi swastika also, it's rotating what way? In the polar direction. It's going counterclockwise, not clockwise, right? This is more primordial. Again, just like the fixed stars and just like the early sky clock. The early sky clock, just to be clear as well, it was really Ursa Major and Minor going around the pole star because it was the center of the wheel of heaven, basically, right? At least to northern people or people in the northern hemisphere. But as far as China and India as well, they had a reverence for these stars, these original 7 stars of enlightenment. Ursa Major has been referred to. So you can go to the next.
You could see a little bit of the triskelion in some of those symbols, and the triskelion is said to be the oldest symbol in human history.
Someone in the chat brought up the idea of well field, which is a Chinese character for farm, and it also forms the character for sun as well. I just wanted to say this. In Chinese cosmology, like the pole star symbolism is extremely important. It's related to the Temple of Heaven in Beijing, which people will sometimes say is like a Taoist temple, but that's really a Tengriist or a kind of heaven worship temple. And so the star sort of asterism worship is a really important idea in Chinese culture, because they've had different periods where they preferred planets or stars, but the sort of pole star, and it's there are also Buddhist parallels, but it's a very important deity for both that kind of like Manchurian Tengriism as well as East Asian Buddhism. Sorry, I just wanted to say
Gotcha. No, right on. Thank you. So the next slide you can go to is just more examples, right? Obviously, of swastikas around the world. But there you go. There's there's Ursa Major going around the pole star, right? So my understanding, I've said this so many times before as well, but I actually think we get the number 7, literally the shape of the number 7, I think is a northern shape. I think it relates to basically when you're looking at Ursa Major, the end of the vessel part of the dipper points towards the pole star. And so there's kind of an implied line from that last star there towards the pole star. And it looks just like the number 7. And so the number 7 is so significant and so important for so many different reasons. It's absolutely wild. So there's even...
Mario, if I could interject real quick, think about the Little Dipper and the question mark.
There you go.
It's
That's what you're saying? Yeah. Right. Well, speaking of the Little Dipper, if you go to the next slide, you'll see the Little Dipper as well, Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. So that's what I'm talking about. So people have said that basically it's Ursa Major going around the pole star like 4 times a year. So 1 per season, right? Just almost if you take a snapshot, which again, seems as though this was the primordial sky clock. Time was a bit different. People had a different interpretation of time. So you're following Ursa Major going around the pole star once a year, basically, right? And there's all sorts of different ways in which people use Ursa Major and Minor for like eye tests and like things like that. So it goes on and on and on and on. The Dipper history is absolutely wild. You can cruise through the next slide and go to the Black Sun, I think. Because to me, in many ways, these are like very closely related. And so once again, this to me it just feels like a wheel, wheel symbolism. We're talking about India. India's flag is a wheel. You can't have a wheel without the central axis, right? So there's 12 spokes, right, that are emanating. They're all going, by the way, once again, if there's a rotation here, it looks like it's going counterclockwise, not clockwise, right? You could even say, by the way, I've talked about this. There is an aspect here. You can basically make the argument that the left-hand path is polar, that there's a whole aspect of the left-hand path being polar. And if you're going around a central totem counterclockwise, that central totem is actually on your left-hand side as well, right? So there's even a left-hand dynamic with counterclockwise rotation. And when you get into like black magic and some of these authors, I'm thinking of like Kenneth Grant, I'm thinking of like Michael Aquino, Stephen Flowers, things like that. Some of these guys, they're all about Nazi symbolism, and they have a whole relationship with the Black Sun and Saturn and all sorts of things, right? But to me, this feels almost just like a more circular, a more wheel-like swastika, essentially. But the fact that there's 12 spokes.
Mario, can I ask you a question? Do you think the Nazis came up with the Sonnenrad, or did it exist prior to them, putting it in the basement of that castle?
Wavelsburg. I don't know. I'm not sure where it came from, to be honest with you.
Have you ever read through that Wavelsburg working that Aquino did? He went to the castle, and I think I've read through his own writings on that, and it seems like he was trying to interact directly with the Black Sun and use the Black Sun symbolism that's ingrained in like the marble floors and put up on the walls of the Wavelsburg castle that Himmler had. But this is like tied to inner earth too. It was for the Nazis, at least, because they were, speaking of real, they believed that there was an entrances to the inner earth, and they believed some of the entrances were up at the North Pole, up near that whole Hyperborean thing, but also that there was like a race down there, and part of the belief was that inside the earth they didn't have a sun in there, but they had some other form of energy that they called the Black Sun, that it was like the sun up here on the surface procures the life force for plants and stuff. Well, down there was the Black Sun that had some sort of a life force energy, frill-like stuff that facilitated life down there. I always thought that was fascinating.
Yeah.
Wikipedia says it was the Nazi symbol, so it didn't actually have a version before that. But I think that's just too convenient because it's got the 12 spokes, which is perfect for that polar symbolism. How could it not have existed before the time of the Nazis? That's what I want to know.
So, in my opinion, the Black Sun, from everything I've gathered, if you want to skip a couple of slides and go to the list, there's a list that I have here. And there is the tile work in the castle. We can go past that. There you go, right here. When we're referring to the spiritual sun, Black Sun, philosopher's sun, midnight sun, invisible sun, central sun, or secret sun, we're actually referring to the exact same thing, in my opinion, in my estimation. And it's actually a stationary sun at where? The center. That's why it has so much center symbolism associated with it. And that's why a lot of symbols that associate with the center as well have been related to the center of the world. And I think that there has been basically, it's been misunderstood. And I don't personally, I know that there's major caverns. I know that there's major things underneath the earth, but I am not personally like a hollow earther person. So when I think of the center of the earth, I don't think of actually penetrating the earth. I'm only thinking of the middle of the earth, like as in the north, as in the central pole, basically, right? The world axis. So really, in actuality, the Black Sun is a world axis symbol. It represents the center of the wheel. It represents the point of pivot for all things. It's just it's a more esoteric understanding of things. And even midnight, the midnight sun, the midnight time of day, time of night, midnight has all sorts of polar connotations with it. There's a reason why, as an example, Catholic Mass, the midnight Mass happens, in Capricorn. There's a huge Saturnian aspect with midnight. The turning of the year from year to year, at midnight. All of the midnight celebrations generally in the West happen during Capricorn season. And so there's a lot of good reasons for that. And also, I'll just say 12 o'clock on a clock is pointing up, north on a compass is pointed up. So literally 12 o'clock on a clock face and then north is in the exact same position. So I made a video about this, about all of the ways in which it relates to each other. So that's my personal.
You also have to consider how cold it is in the winter, so you can see the entire sky. There's no humidity, there's no clouds, there's nothing blocking your view of the entire night sky. So to have these celebrations in the wintertime seems so natural. You've got all these fires and everything, glowing, and then you're looking up at the sky and you're appreciating your gods in that way. It makes so much more sense to appreciate this polar sort of world in the wintertime.
Yeah, I mean, even the Northern Lights, there's a whole thing with the Northern Lights and the symbolism behind the Northern Lights and what that represents and everything else. Also, Christmas is like the most overt Northern holiday that we actually have. Where does Santa come from? He comes from the North Pole. It's more of a modern tradition, but the whole dynamic of putting a star on top of a tree, that's the North Star on top of the world tree. That's basically the world axis in your home, and you're putting the central star, right on top of it, in my opinion. So if you just want to go up one slide, this is one of Guinan's quotes. He says, "It goes without saying that these two symbolisms, polar and solar, must never be confused, and that, as we have often indicated, polar symbolism is far more fundamental and, in fact, truly primordial." I can't find anything that contradicts this, personally. That's just what, though. And then if you just want to go back to the black sun symbol, too, just go up one or two. We're dealing with 12 spokes. That means there's a hidden relationship with the number 13, right? The number 13 breaks cycles. It's even been said that the number 13 breaks solar cycles. And so in the astrology world, there's, people debate on whether there's 12 or 13 signs. If you have 12, signs, that means that there's actually a relationship with the number 13, because also there's the point of pivot in the middle, right? If there's a 13th sign, however, which it would be
lunar calendar. That's exactly right. The lunar calendar
exactly.
would include that 13th sign.
Yeah, exactly. So, so when you get deep into Ophiuchus symbolism and you start understanding why it's the 13th sign, it's because it breaks solar paradigms. It breaks solar patterns thoroughly. And actually, Ophiuchus is more central, which means that it's actually more northern than all of the other signs. Ophiuchus has been referred to as a bend in the river, or the exit from the zodiac. Where? To the northern sky. That's what it's all about. That's what Ophiuchus is, the most polar sign in the zodiac, which is why it's such a controversial sign, right? So anyways, those are just some of my thoughts, on the black sun there.
So Aquino wrote that he was here in the Hall of the Dead in Heinrich Himmler's Sanctorium. He talks about how, I just think this is interesting, right? So I'm just going to throw it in. He talks about how he starts to see sigils before him, and they go on to like influence the order of the trapezoid. But he's like, I see the two lower points, the three curved sixes, the trident rising from the flames of hell. I saw its ladder design in the church, the sixes and the flames now gone. And he just goes on to kind of talk about how he's adapting the sigil based on this vision that he has. And he says in here somewhere where that the feeling of the room rushed over him. And it's like, man, this guy's like totally embracing like Himmler stuff.
I totally get what he's doing, though. I do understand from a tantric perspective, like he's trying to receive the word. This is obviously a big part of the order of trapezoids, is the key words from each angle represents a key word. They don't have all the key words. Aquino didn't leave them, all of them. That's just sort of the lore as far as I understand it. And so it's always like this kind of search for the spectral, like Mario's talking about, like the 13th sort of, it's an axial pivot. So this is like very tantric again. Like this is why there's two real factions. There's like the faction that draw from the Eddas and this like kind of 10th century pagan Kang material. And then there's also people who draw from Tantra and then like, so this more, primordial Himalayan stuff. Because like when you guys are talking about like Aryans, this is very well understood for East Asians. I know this is going to be a sort of a surprise to people, but Tibetans believe that they are Arya. They believe that they are noble. They think that they're the chosen ones.
Oh yeah.
So it's often a matter of perspective, often a matter of view. Like, who do you put in the place of the Magi? Well, if you ask Tibetan Buddhists, they would say that they are the true inheritors of like the tradition of the Magi, because we even practice Homa to this day, which is a fire worship. So I'm just saying that there racial component is only one layer. It's really like so much more for further ranging than that, even geographical. Like, what is considered the North? Like Kazakhstan considers itself the North. Like where I live is considered to be like subarctic.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. No, that's the whole entire thing is the center is everywhere. And so from what I've gathered is that the original homeland potentially was at the north. The original pilgrimage location was at the north. So that means that all pilgrimage locations, all places where people kind of like plant their flag, they put their pole in the ground, right? And they call this home. And they say that this is, I think it's a very healthy thing for a culture or a group of people to have a place in their backyard that they consider to be the navel of the earth, the center of the world, right?
Bingo.
And so there's so many examples of this. That's healthy. That's really healthy. And also it goes back to this primordial origin story that all of humanity has. Even as an example. Just real quick.
You're not going to like what happens, though. Because
what do you mean?
What's the only version of polar symbolism North America has?
It depends on how you look at it.
Nazism. That's the only direction that they can go.
There's actually multiple now. There's you have Tibetan Buddhism that obviously Nick showed the image. That's sort of the symbol also of Bon Po, which is the primordial. They say 26,000 years. That's their own dating. They say they're the pre-Diluvian religion. So I'm just passing it along. I don't belong to it.
I was going to say too. I thought you were
okay
talking.
with it. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm delayed. I'm sorry, I have this. I was gonna say I thought you were talking about the Hopi and Navajo and other American Indian association with the swastika. And before World War II, many people in the United States used it as a fashion symbol, and also many Native American culture did too, just because they had already found it to be profound.
It's true, Ethan, but it goes back to the concept of what is this vril? What is this energy coming from this north place? And in my experience, it feels like a slap across the face. That's what vril feels like to me. It's like, wake up. What are you doing? Right? That slap across the face feeling is this kind of vril that is before like a combat scenario. You've got to wake up. And if everything in America is pointing to this 13, right? We've got 13 colonies, 13 arrows, 13 stars, all these 13s. It's pointing towards that same kind of slap in the face feeling, right? I'm not saying that, all polar symbolism is that, but that's an element of it, that slap in the face, cold water, wake up, what are you doing with your life kind of feeling goes along with this polar symbolism that I think is rising up in the current eon we're entering into.
It's interesting too. There's a lot to be said about the age of Aquarius potentially bringing about a polar age. And just my sort of loose interpretation of that, my armchair interpretation of that, it's fascinating that the card that corresponds with Aquarius in the major arcana is the star card. There's usually 7 stars in the heavens, either 7 in total or 1 with 7 surrounding it. I've made multiple videos and presentations about how this is the star of stars. It's the pole star, right? So there's a direct, in my opinion, I know there's room for debate here, but in my opinion, it's a reference to the North Star. And so isn't that interesting? There's a North Star connection with Aquarius. There's actually North Star northern connection with all the signs, in my opinion, and actually the origins of the zodiac itself. You know, it's the same story above and below. The same idea about man migrating or having an Arctic homeland. It's the exact same thing with the stars, in my estimation, from what I can gather, right? So yeah.
I think it goes back to the trickster.
Those
It's the
conjunctions.
trickster. Oh, go ahead.
No, I agree with that too, actually, Headless. Yeah, like the trickster, the astrotheological trickster, as I like to call it. And these conjunctions, like we've got this Saturn-Neptune conjunction and coming up next year. And some people were talking about how it's going to, be a Renaissance type of a period.
Yeah.
I just
0 point ingress. Just want to
Yeah.
say 0 point ingress. It's happening.
And I was wondering what Mario sees as far as those conjunctions. Like, is there anything, significantly polar in the cards for the future?
I think it is.
But no, sorry, Headless. What were you saying about the trickster thing?
No, that's my point. It's like, look around at what's going on around us. This is not just confined to these esoteric reviews of symbols. It's happening right now. We're seeing this shift from solar back to polar. We're seeing it happen in front of us. That's what we're feeling. This is current events. I think a lot of people don't understand that, but there's a shift in consciousness happening, whether we accept it as being like a fourth dimensional, fifth dimensional kind of thing. It's not the thing that's happening. There is a shift in consciousness. And I think
there's a shift in consciousness if we decide that we're all moving in an axial system. I personally believe we are moving in an axial system as well. But I'm also Buddhist, so we believe in an axial system. That's like kind of foundational for us. So
that's the point, the foundational aspect of it. It's like there's a shift in the foundation itself.
But if you don't do any practices, if you're just like totally oblivious to everything, then it doesn't matter.
Well, I think
that builds pressure.
Something I kind of wanted to throw in here. I think what Headless was trying to say, how I was seeing it, is that like during the Nazi party, and I would say now you're seeing the swastika, no matter how the fuck it's used, it's still popping up. Regardless, it's showing up in different areas. And people are getting into this mindset. Something's got to change and people start rising up, regardless of what the outcome is. What I was going to say is I do see how I think the Nazi party, with Hitler, perfected that kind of rise up, change. What the fuck is wrong? These people's are bad. That person's bad. Why are we letting this happen? And we're seeing it again now when we had, the trannies, these people, COVID, all this stuff is all, whatever. You're seeing it again. Now, Trump may not be fucking wearing the swastika, but it's showing up in other countries anyway.
Right. And, if we look at ourselves and understand that, hey, there's a shift that's been delayed a long time. And we all know that a lot of people are just coasting because they don't have to consider any of the energetic consequences of their actions. Like, it's just not a thing where we live right now. But if we take an introspective look at what we've done, it's not a pretty picture, because it's like there's a perspective shift that's happening, right? So we're seeing ourselves from outside ourselves. And I think that's what things are happening with this trickster level energy, because as we see ourselves in the things we've done, like who we've elected, what we think is going to happen, we understand that that's not a reality and never has been. And that's a big blow to our collective egos. You know what I'm saying? It's like, that's not
ever
reality.
That would be the next big shift in consciousness, is people waking up from the current psyop that, with the government stuff. I don't want to get too political here, so I'm trying to
and the next one, you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's all of it is within that same perspective.
Yeah. And you got Chris Bledsoe out there saying that there's a shift in consciousness coming next year on Easter that's connected with the divine feminine. So, Nick, I think I jumped on you there. Sorry.
No, it's all right. Oh, another thing, I have associated that symbol with the idea of death. That's just my opinion because of my own experiences. And
It's
in the
100%
times when
correct.
you see it, you're seeing a lot of fucking death, regardless if it's from a bomb, fake disease, an injection, whatever the fuck it is. People have been dying also when you see this image rising.
Path of souls, you know, it's the path of souls. It's the change in the equinox. When the
Yeah.
equinox shifts,
Well,
we're seeing it.
You got to remember, God was always seen in fire, or most of the time he was seen in fire. You know, the burning bush, the thing that led the Israelites. And what does fire create? What does it do? It destroys things, but there's also a rebirth after that. So every time you destroy something, there's got to be a rebirth right after.
Yes. That's when
Kali
the
Yuga.
magician return. He comes back.
Ursa Major has also been referred to as the coffin of Osiris, right? And so that's very interesting. Also, we can't forget that Doth, the hidden Sephiroth on the Kabbalistic tree, the 11th, is the gateway to the Klipothic tree, the root side or the night side of the tree of life. And Doth associates with the north, right? And so so there's that relationship as well. And so the death thing, definitely, there's like a lot of different angles with that.
Zoroaster too, Zoroastrianism with their fire god, you know, cleansing of the body.
Bingo.
Instead of cleansing with water, they was cleansing with fire. They had to walk through fire.
Yeah, I think that's a great weave, actually. The Zoroastrian tradition.
Iranians are converting back to Zoroastrian religions right now in record numbers.
I don't think they ever really, if you understand how Iranian Islam really worked, the Iranians never really converted to anything. They've always been Zoroastrian, Mandean, Manichaean. They've always been a mystery religion country. The rumor was even during the 70s that the king or the prince, I'm forgetting. I'm sorry, Lisa. I'm not being exact. I know I should be more specificity. The rumor was always that he was a Zoroastrian, that they would import like all these animals, like very like that Rodolfo guy in Mexico. They would import like lions. That's part of Vedic Yajna. People want to talk about like return to the worship of the ancestors and the gods. Like that requires human sacrifice, eagle sacrifice, elephant sacrifice, lion sacrifice, horse sacrifice, literally every day into a like a huge Yajna fire. So this is not a realistic. It's like the click backwards that we can't really go backwards to like a Vedic kingship. We have to sort of move forwards, and I think that's also like the Tonka that Nick brought up before with the goddess holding it. Like that is the goddess of the pole star. She is the Barbello of the 7 matrikas, the 7 mothers of the pole star. And
every click backward is a click forward in time.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Headless, because she did pole is actually the actual quote unquote air quotes pole of her husband, and she bites it off. And she but he actually gains it back. It's just it's one part of the story, right? Because that's a much more sort of dharmic way to consider it. Different parts of the story there is no real chronology, because if you live in a dharmic system, it's axial and cyclical at the same time. So different parts of the story actually don't need to be in chronological order. They can still be connected. So
that's what I'm saying.
Swastika might represent this sort of knowledge being dormant in many different cultures, because you do see it showing up in so many. Like if you look at the Sube or the Swube tribe, they were a branch off of the Persian Aryan bloodline.
Right.
That's where we get Sweden. Sweden was named, so maybe the Swedes, it seems like they were part of this at some point, part of this Persian Aryan bloodline, and they used that Swiss swastika a lot over there. And even like I think Thor Heyerdahl, he was looking and he found some records that indicated that Odin from Norse mythology founded the Swedish dynasty, and that he came out of maybe even a Semitic bloodline. So
It's
I don't
not
know.
clear who Odin really is. That's what I think is really interesting about what you're saying, Tim, is that a lot of people, like I'm not into any paganism, but like in particular, I'm not into the Norse stuff. But I do understand it to a degree because of people around me. And I will just say that he's a very dynamic figure. So he can like take what Tim is saying, like that could be part of his story. And like the thing about Odin, even though I don't really identify with it at all, is that he can handle many stories attached to him.
Yeah,
He's kind of like a deity
Yes.
of
There you go.
paradoxes, many paradoxes. So he
There
can
you go.
actually handle contradiction.
totally. And I see Odin as being very mercurial. And I know that you were talking about the trickster, Headless, and the trickster is very mercurial as well, right? I see Mercury all over the place. And I would say that if there's a deity / planet that is highly polar in nature, it's Mercury. Always associated with the phallus, with the pole, all of these different types of things. And traveling between realms, being the messenger of the gods, how is he getting there? Through the central axis, in my opinion. And so I just want to riff on a couple things real quick about sort of the spiritual shift with everything here. So just bringing up the wheel because it's appropriate with the swastika. Symbolically, the wheel, right? We're all kind of like our own wheel. The wheel is one of the most important symbols out there, in my estimation. The outside of the wheel relates to division and multiplicity. It represents being outside of self. The outside of the wheel is best related to earth itself and physicality. It's the least balanced part of the wheel. And so you want to go to the center of the wheel. You want to go to the center of your wheel. Know thyself and you'll know the universe. The middle of the wheel is the transcendental part of the wheel because you're now dealing with the axle. And when you get there symbolically, you are the prime mover, unmoved mover. You are immutable. You cause the wheel to turn by being stationary. This is going to the center of self. To me, this is what polar symbolism is all about, is the center of self and realizing the transcendental aspect of self that completely surpasses your actual own identity and personality and birth date and sun sign and all that kind of stuff. You're a part of the Godhead, right? And so it's acknowledging the most divine aspect of who you are. So that's what polar symbolism brings about. That's why I think it's actually a dangerous thing, or was a dangerous thing to promote, because it's too holistic. It brings everything back to center. And what Gwenon says, who's my mentor teacher right now, is that the difference between the golden age and the current dark age that we're in is literally the loss of the awareness of the center of heaven, of earth, and self, right? There's a golden thread or cord that exists between the center of self and the center of the cosmos, And so that's kind of how I see it. And there's a very strong heart-based aspect to polar wisdom as well, being the symbolic center, one of the symbolic centers in self, right? And so also the heart itself also being related to like a seed, being related to a cave, also pumping blood and then the blood returning back to it. So it has the toroidal symbolism connected to it. Heart also being an anagram for earth as well. There's all sorts of things that go along with it. The color green being related to it, the central chakra.
Healing.
Yeah, healing. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's something interesting that you said, Mario, about like the return to self, because this is the difference between, like, maybe you could say if you want to say there's a horizontal axis between East and West. We don't have an eternalist idea of fixed self. So like when you're like, but this, you can see this in Islam. They have a much more, I would call it Gevuratic and Netzach, or a Venus and Mars kind of relationship, where they like to purify the full self. Like they want no self, but they kind of want to go through the fire into annihilation. And obviously Gwenon did become a Muslim in the end. And so, but they also have that preference. And just like Mormons like that, like Netzach, kind of like a return, infinite money magic. That's totally fine. But I'm just saying that they also have like a more eternalist kind of idea of the soul and like where it's going. Like we have a more infinite kind of way of looking at it, where you can also go up, you can also come back. It's like a dynamic kind of it's a dynamic action of the soul rather than fixed.
So what?
And there's no soul. There's no soul. Sorry.
No worries. What camp does this fit in with the concept of getting to such a transcendental point within that self does not exist, nor does duality, nor does separation?
Yes, you have to be, well,
polarity.
obviously, yeah, for Tantra, you have to be non-dual for 100%, like must. but then there's no self, but there is a self, because just because you negate something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. This is tantric logic. So yes, it's a little paradoxical, but we would say that the paradox is always resolved in the consort. So if you're doing an external deity practice, it makes sense. This concept makes sense, is what I'm saying. And so basically you get to a place of emptiness, which is, as Lisa so eloquently said, I often quote you, Lisa, saying this, is masslessness and luminousness. So
Yeah, exactly.
Jin is
That's what I mean when I think that when you return to your most ultimate self, that's what occurs, is what it seems
There's
like
just-
to me with my language.
I think
absolutely.
What I'm hearing is Jin preaching Rudolf Spangler's Decline of the West. When a certain society has reached a conclusion point for the questions they've had of nature, they start to decline and shift, right? And so once
Is it a decline or is it entropy? In that you're inserting random, and you're not inserting chaos, you're inserting randomness. And so it's this movement towards disorder in order to promote order. And it's almost like the swastika itself in its spiral or its infiniteness is trying to reset, or maybe what the Vril or the Nazis were trying to do is to throw the cards up in the air so that they can create randomness in order to reset the deck in their favor, in odds. And that's, I think when we concentrate on the actual swastika and talk about political systems or government systems, we are being so myopic in our thought. It has nothing to do with man. It has nothing to do with the current government systems that are in existence today. It has everything to do with creating randomness so that we can reset the odds in our favor, or whoever is holding the cards, rather, or at least attempting to.
Decoherence. I think that's
exactly.
That's one of the key words for, if you want to call it, the aeon. So I think that's what Lisa, exactly what she said, encapsulated perfectly.
You burn it all down. You burn it all down with a chaotic mentality, so you can rebuild.
Rebellious mentality.
Exactly. Because if you think about World War II, let's just be honest, it had nothing to do with the Nazis. It had everything to do with occultism. 100%. It had nothing to do with anything other than, I'm going to take your toys because I want to be a more powerful magician. That's it. That was it.
Yeah. That's all words.
Pretty much. That's what I think.
100%. Yeah.
It's Oswald Spangler. I kept saying Rudolph, but it's Oswald Spangler, Decline of the West. He was not part of the Nazi Party, but he was making a quantitative review of the different societies that had risen up and then fallen down. And so what he concluded was, when they had answered the questions that started those societies, then they ended up declining and shifting into something else. And so I think that's a really potent examination of history, is because all of this stuff comes from the mind first, And so the mind of the people participating in that society end up creating the egregores that can be answered or declined. You know what I'm saying? So that whole shift, I think, is pretty specific to what we're going through now in the United States and why it's so polar. It all draws back into itself.
Also, the Nazis knew that they couldn't show the world certain aspects of their full character, especially the occult stuff. And that's why we're playing catch up right now. And a lot of people are finding that there's a lot of information out there that's kind of been hanging out in the shadows. Like, you can't just watch a lot of World War II documentaries and expect to know the full nature of what went down with that war. And like, the Nazis were really good at masking certain elements of their character. Like, even when they held the Olympics, they put on a totally different, facade for the world. They stopped being racist to the Jews out in the streets, and they were harassing Jewish businesses. They stopped all that, and they did other things. They put on a mask for the camera. They knew how to mask this stuff, and even like, if you look at the story of Hitler and the clairvoyant Hanussen, Hitler kind of used him, got a bunch of knowledge out of him, including occult knowledge and how to use mandrake root and all kinds of stuff for ritual purposes. And then they killed that guy. They killed him. So they cleaned up after themselves, especially with this occult stuff.
There's so many good examples of people that have escaped from both Nazism and communism, because it seemed like dueling magicians, right? And you see a lot of this because if you look at how the Nazis rescued El Duce, the boss of Italy, is they used a bunch of dowsers.
They used divination.
Right.
I love that you know that story. It's awesome.
But here's the thing. They were also using it to do sub-hunting. They were using dowsers to show them where these different submarines were in the Atlantic.
Yeah, there was an admiral in the Nazi Navy who had some sort of divination school
who beat
going
the Nazis. Who beat the Nazis. Gerald Gardner with his cone of power. Have you ever heard of the cone of power ritual within Wicca? It's the polar symbolism. You're just going around in a circle and you're building up energy and you're driving it out towards whatever target you want it to be. And they did the cone of power ritual to disrupt Nazi dowsing, which creates an analuma, right? I mean, you're creating a figure eight every time you're dowsing with the pendulums over a map. So that's polar symbolism over solar symbolism.
Even
basic terms.
In Freemasonry, the the plumb line is a known world axis symbol, which reminds me very much of a pendulum, right?
There you go.
So one of the things I was going to bring up as well is, Vril was brought up several times, right? And so I have a take on what's going on there with that. It's been honestly years since I really dove into that information. One of the things I heard recently as well is like the well-known photos of the women of that society, Maria Orsic and stuff like that. They do look doctored. They really do. It's very, very soft, sort of lacking deep. I've been using Photoshop.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
Back.
While he's frozen, Mario, you froze there for a second, but I missed part of that, but I will agree with you on that. I can't find a lot of credibility to any of those Vril Society pictures, but what were you saying?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, one of the details that really interested me years ago when I was diving through all this stuff was the relationship to Aldebaran. And this is a massive royal star in Taurus, right? It's the eye of the bull. So in the Taurus constellation, you have two stars that represent its eyes. You have Aldebaran or Aldebaran, and then you have Ayin, which is like Hebrew for eye itself, right? And Taurus and bull and cow symbolism has been something that I've been interested in for a very, very long time, actually. It was one of my first deep dive rabbit holes was the cow and the bull. And so I've always been interested in it. And then, of course, you can't get interested or you can't dive into Taurus symbolism, the constellation, without getting into the Pleiades as well, right? The Seven Sisters, it's often called. And so one of the things that Vril Society, lore basically says is that they were in contact with their ancestry from Aldebaran, right? And so to me, I find a lot of symbolism connected to Taurus and the Pleiades very intriguing when people make reference to either it being an exit out of here, a gateway here, or that their ancestry or that they're in touch, with other beings or what have you from that neck of the woods in the heavens, right? And so my personal take is that this axis between Taurus and Scorpio is actually a newer modern axis that basically took off during the solar age, during heliocentric times. And so with Taurus, again, you have Aldebaran, massive royal star, and then opposite of Taurus is Scorpio, and you have Antares, which is the heart of the scorpion, right? And so between Taurus and Scorpio, it's been referred to as, Taurus has been referred to as the, I believe the Silver Gate or the Golden Gate, can't remember which one's which. And then Scorpio has been referred to as the opposite, a golden gate or a silver gate. Taurus has been referred to as basically the gateway to hell because it is opposite of Scorpio and it's opposite of the galactic center, right? Scorpio, when you're looking towards it, you're actually looking towards the galactic center. So this axis is really important. And so my personal opinion is that actually all of the axis polarity signs in the zodiac are also really important. And so you can look at the zodiac if you're going by 12 signs. You can study the 12 signs. Obviously, I do encourage that. That's what I do on my channel all the time. But it's almost as though there's like 6 pairs of signs, right? So there's 6 sort of axes that cross, the ecliptic. And so my opinion is that all of these axis polarity pairings actually are all emblematic of the original axis, basically. That this vertical orientation during a more golden age, hyperborean age, polar age, whatever you want to say, that was the primary axis. It was vertical. And as I said earlier, there was a vertical orientation with the divine. And then during heliocentric solar times, everything became flattened and everything became more horizontal. So what happened was there needed to be a substitute for Ursa Major in the northern sky. And the best substitute was the Pleiades right next to Taurus, because it doesn't actually have 7 main stars. It actually has 6. And there's lore about the missing 7th star, about the missing 7th sister. She goes missing, basically. And so the symbolism associated with the northern sky and the world axis literally shifted to Taurus and Scorpio during the solar age, basically. And so Guanon has written about this. There's other traditional perennial authors that have written about this shift. But I think also all of the polarities, all of the 6 axes, whatever, they all represent this original axis, basically. So I think this is interesting. So if you backtrack the symbolism, and symbolic shift is one thing that I didn't even realize I would get into, but I'm interested in it. So if you backtrack the symbolism, and we have this group who says that they're in touch with their ancestry or ETs from this place in the heavens, and they look Aryan, to me, this just echoes back to this northern symbolism, basically, that we've been talking about. And so to me, that's more of a clearer sort of picture. Also, the northern sky, Ursa Major, if you look at the Dendera zodiac, the Egyptian Dendera zodiac, which I know that's like a later creation or whatever, Ursa Major is a bull's thigh. It's the thigh of the bull, also called the thigh of Set. So there's literally northern bull symbolism also attached to that portion of the heavens. So I just think that there was this great shift from what was going on up there, including some bull stuff, and then got shifted over to that neck of the woods.
Yeah, and
it's funny. It's fun. I'm sorry.
Even if the real society was just a lot of about nothing, a lot to do about nothing, maybe there is something there. I don't want to discount it totally, but let's just say there's no real society. Some of the Edda Society or even the Thule Society, those guys was, like I said, they were in all these other orders. What they were trying to do was this was like an occult renaissance that's happening in around the turn of the century in Germany, and these guys are trying to bring back in this Aryan symbolism and bring back in what they believe was an Aryan bloodline. So they're trying to reconnect with it. And I think that's what the Nazi Party was born out of, real society or no real society.
Mm-hmm. It's funny I was mentioning Pleiades because when you look at Pleiades from the Taínos, they usually looked at it as a time for agricultural needs. That's when when the raining season used to start to begin. But then you have in the Popol Vuh, which you have the 400 boys who are creating the Pleiades system. And then if you look at the book of Enoch, you have, according to the Haggadah, the angel Shemazi listed after a maiden named Istahar. And that's basically where they get God rewarded Istahar for her by commemorating her as the 7-star constellation Pleiades. So you have the 7-star Pleiades everywhere from, and this usually has something to do with agricultural needs. So that's very interesting because once it meets a certain point in the sky, that's when the rainy season will happen, and that's when they need to start doing agriculture. Where you also got to remember the 7 sisters were also known as the 400 boys. That's the ones from the Popol Vuh, who created the Pleiades system because a giant basically brought down their house, and then they became the 400 boys. So it's interesting y'all was talking about the Pleiades system. Very interesting.
What you said, Tyrone, was really interesting to me simply because in Taoism, the 9 emperor gods are also considered to be the sons who composed the Pleiades. Now, this is an ancient, like Shang dynasty sort of Taoist, proto-Taoist, pre-Taoist idea, but it's continued onward to this day. And there's a conflation that has happened over the last like 2,000 years where sometimes they get associated with different constellations, different planets. It's never quite the same, but the oldest story is that they are the sons of the emperor, the Jade Emperor usually, but not always, who then comprise, the Pleiades. And then also to what Mario was saying, there's a really interesting story from Nepal that says that the Matrikas, or the Pleiades sisters, who are called mothers, not sisters, but that can also be called sisters, so it can be either or. There's actually 8, so Ashta Matrika. So then that means that there's a hidden 9th, so that can be understood. But then also going back to what Tyrone said, so the swastika would have been that symbol that Lisa said, the swasti, to when at the quarterly turn of every year, you would worship a quadrant in the form of the goddess riding a lion. And then she would divide maybe into, like, the oldest one that we know is called the Navratri. So the 9 nights. So then it becomes like a 9-spoke wheel with Durga in the center. And sometimes you can add Shiva in to make that hidden 11th that Mario referenced, because Shiva really is your mind. It's like the person witnessing, you could say, the wheel turning.
Right.
So I thought that was really interesting.
Mario,
and you can even go back to the Doggone tribe. If you go back to the Doggone tribe, they even connect to the seven sisters, or the Pleiades system, and that represented men and fish. So this is very interesting.
Shiva first appeared to Brahma as a massive pole that stretched thousands of trillions of miles in either direction. And
Shiva
Brahma
can be Brahma in his own Puranas, though. That's what I was talking about, Shakti Puranas.
Right, but I'm just saying, like, very literally, Shiva was a pole at one time to demonstrate how far he could reach in either direction. So, I mean, that's polar symbolism, up, down, left, and right, you know?
Tyrone, were you done? Tyrone.
Yeah, what's up?
You done or no?
Oh yeah, I was done. I was just showing some sources from the Tainos to the Popol Vuh to the Book of Enoch, you know, and you can go anywhere with the 7 sisters and Pleiades. Each one of them has their own understanding, but it's a certain part or time in the life where they only worship that sunrise, or that star, or what you want to call it. So it's just very interesting, because it has to, it goes back to the raining season in agriculture. And what was very interesting, what he was talking about when he was talking about the cows and bulls and stuff like that, a lot of people don't know this, but if you live by a farm, most cows or bulls, when they excrete, their shit basically creates some type of a psychedelic mushroom. Like, it's found in their psychedelic, like a certain type of mushroom grows under their poop, basically, right? And some people are known to take that and to eat it and have a psychedelic adventure, I guess you could say, right? And that's why the bulls, the cows, and so on and so forth in certain countries, they're sacred animals, because they're the closest that we can get to what we know as the Godhead, are outside of our consciousness or something like that. So it's very interesting, because in America, they have to inject these cows with certain types of vaccines, so they don't create this enzyme to create that type of enzyme in their poop, which would create that type of mushroom where they can go on a psychedelic trip.
Just want to add a few things here. One, that reminds me that I have a book by this woman named Judy K. King, and it's called The Isis Thesis. And according to her breakdown...
Oh, boy.
Oh, we lost him.
Oh.
Oh.
I think he made a good
Am I
point
back?
about.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, cool. So Judy K. King in the ISIS thesis was saying that at one point in time, according to her decoding of the Egyptian hieroglyphs, that the Egyptians had this understanding of going to the northern sky upon death, and that they referred to the opening at the northern sky as the horn of a great bull as well, right?
Taurus
So there's
symbol.
more bull symbolism going on up there. Also, I just want to mention too, if people want my full take on the Pleiades and this whole polar to solar shift and why people associate these things with the Pleiades in today's world, I have a presentation called The Pleiadians. And so you can watch that, and it's my full breakdown on that. One of the things I mentioned there is that Atlas, the Greek Atlas, who held up the heavens, or in modern sort of context, he holds up the world, but in old illustrations, he's actually holding up the firmament. He's holding up the night sky, basically. The seven sisters are his daughters, basically. And so, to me, what this suggests is that he is a world axis symbol, and that he's a pillar, basically, in the middle of Earth, holding up the vault of heaven. But in modern contexts, he's now holding up the world. You know, this is post heliocentrism, more than likely, is my guess, right? People did not have this globular, sort of spherical idea of Earth, you know,
Well,
until
Mario,
Go ahead.
Mario, the bone at the base of your skull is called the Atlas bone
Correct. Yeah.
because it's holding up the entire skull, the entire night sky, and all of the memories of the Greeks were put into the night sky and the asterisms of these different constellations. So you've got a huge asterism, polar memory constellation crossover between all this stuff.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. For sure.
You've got that headpiece of Isis too. That always struck me as looking like the Taurus symbol.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely related. Absolutely. You know, that kind of reminds me a little bit of if there's an Isis equivalent in the tarot, you could make the argument that the high priestess, you know, she sometimes also has kind of like this headdress sort of thing. It just reminds me of, you know, cow horns, basically. And she's sitting where? Always right in between two pillars. She's the transcendental central pillar, basically.
What you said about the seven sisters, sorry, the seven sisters, it reminds me of the genetic experiment where they have determined, I don't know if it's been modified since, but they've determined that every single human being has come from one woman, and it's called the seven daughters of Eve theory. And so when they trace back all mitochondrial DNA, they are all traced back to at least one of the seven daughters of Eve, quote unquote, women that have ever existed in genetic terms. Yeah.
That's interesting, you know, because there's so much overlapping symbolism. Goddess symbolism with the number 7 is nuts. You know, Virgin Mary had 7 sorrows of Christ or Mary, and then also
the seven sisters in the constellation.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. There's something else I was going to say about that, but yeah, that's fascinating.
Is that, Lisa? Does that have to do with some sort of? There's 7 women who have different genetics that produce different types of people.
Well, they have at least traced it back to 7 origins of women, because mitochondrial DNA, and I'm sure you know, mitochondrial DNA is only passed down maternally. So when you look at mitochondrial DNA, you are looking at the maternal line. And if you can trace it all the way back, you can pretty much start to piece people together in terms of what maternal line they're coming from based on haploid groups. And so when they've tried to take it all the way back, they can at least pinpoint it down to at least 7 different haplogroups. And if you're looking at mitochondrial DNA, then you're looking at maternal line. So haplogroups, maternal line, 7 women.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say Lady Babylon and the Babylon star, 7-pointed star, has 7s all throughout it. I'm going to do it at some point. This is probably way too premature to announce anything. It doesn't really matter. But I'm going to do a presentation about Lady Babylon being a northern goddess. It makes too much sense. It's what the deal is, in my estimation. Yeah.
Is there Ishtar ties with Lady Babylon that you found?
I would imagine so. I tend to see similarities over differences, so I may not be the right person to ask about that.
Believe it or not, the reason I even put this image up is some of the stuff we talked about is actually, believe it or not, in this image. So like when people don't know like what an occultist is thinking about when they create something.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of stuff in this. The eyeballs in here, you know.
Yeah, definitely. I was also going to mention too. Someone brought up the Pleiades and fish symbolism and whatever. The oceanic aquatic symbolism with the northern sky is completely off the charts as well. And one example of that is the Saptarishis or the seven rishis, the seven sages, being like fishmen or traveling by a fish, like as an ark or a boat to Earth. Right, they're always associated, seemingly, with fish symbolism in one way, shape, or form. So the idea of like seven gods coming from the northern sky is kind of a classic thing.
Even in the Voynich, I thought it was interesting how we talk about the seven sisters. It always had seven women, and it was agriculture in a sense. It had all these plants and different shit in it, and there was always they were always green, like the women, which made me think of like Netzach, and you could have a female. Netzach. So which goes with number 7. So
totally. Yeah.
Another thing I did want to try to do, if possible, I can't forget about it. I wanted to go over the hexagram ritual, but my voice is too fucked up.
If you want, I can quickly. You want to talk about the midnight?
Whatever. Oh no! In the ritual, it's called the hexagram. So obviously, you got a hexagram. There's the LVX formula. At one point, you make the swastika. That ritual existed before World War II. So in a ritual that was used by a lot of magicians, already incorporated the hexagram, because you're drawing that as well as you're doing it, and you're throwing up the fucking swastika in it as well. It's even said. And then what's interesting is that if you don't want to use a swastika, you can put one arm up and one that way. And, like almost making like, now I'm starting to wonder, is that like some sort of access as well, or some other weird thing? Like it's just, to me, instead of making the swastika, if that has to do with, a polar shit. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so when Crowley released his Thoth deck, he included 3 magician cards. And the well-known magician card, there's a pole right behind the magician. It's almost like he's ascending the pole in one way, right? He's like floating upward.
Yeah.
But one of the alternative versions is a figure, the magician, in that same position. And I'm assuming it's the same swastika position. And he's nude, so his phallus is showing, basically. And so he's associating that with the magician card. Like, absolutely. Which makes sense, because again, it's a sign of the pole. It's a symbol of the pole.
So here's the mitochondria that mad scientist was talking about, the haplogroups and the 7 daughters. You got Ursula, Xena, Helena, Velda, Kentapera, Swedish, Terra, or Kentapera, Terra. Oh, I'm sorry, Velda, Terra, Katrine, and Jasmine. And then you got haplogroup UXHV TKJ. And it gives you a breakdown on it. And it was a book that was written by Brian Sykes that talks the daughters of the gene. Yep. So
now I don't know if it's been updated since, but the last time I remember, I read this book, and I remember, and it's been controversial that people have said no, the way his methodology wasn't correct or whatever, but it's held up a little bit more than what people have said that it did. But so yeah.
Yeah, I actually did a podcast discussion with a geneticist, and I talk a lot about haplogroup E1B1B with him. And it's just very interesting because, they take haplogroups from what they consider the closest Homo sapien that we are related to. But the thing is that even as a Homo sapien, our changes have been drastic from 300,000 years to where we are now. So what do you really consider a Homo sapien, and where do you consider the first haplogroup to come from? Because we know that there's been like what they quote unquote say human-like species from around the world. So, I mean, you got the 7 continents. So, I mean, let's just go with that.
Yeah.
Also, just want to say that the number 7 correspondence with the North is so strong that if you look at older Latin maps, The north is labeled as septentrio, right? Sept, as in like septenary, number 7, right? And so even there's all sorts of lore and things to talk about with Set also basically being related to Sept, pretty much, and September actually being a reference to the number 7. And so it's so intrinsically tied that you'll see literally a reference to the number 7 in maps for the northern portion of Earth.
So it seems to me like that the $7 of Eve doesn't really work with or jive well with the out of Africa thing. And, just that's just my perspective upon seeing this today. But I saw that they had one of the Swedish groups mentioned there as well. And I'll just throw this in real quick. Like that Swedish Norway dynasty possibly started by Odin, if we're to believe Thor Heyerdahl's research. They come out of the Caucasus Mountains, as did some of the Hindu groups that went to India, like the Brahmin class. They came from the Caucasus Mountains, if I can say that correctly. And that's known because of DNA tests. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but I'm mentioning it again because that means like you got two groups there that seemingly look to be very unrelated. I'm talking about Swedish people and people in India. They don't, but if you go back far enough, it's all seemingly one group that they came out of. And to touch on Lisa's point, maybe they were using that maternal bloodline as well. And part of the bloodline has to do with carrying along the knowledge of your ancestors and the symbols of your ancestors, like the swastika.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we have to bear in mind is that the sun wasn't shining as hot as it did today as it did back then. The sun has gone through different seasons, whether it's every 11 years or whether it's every 100,000 years. So what we look at in terms of melanistic groups around the world may not have been like that, or they may have been like that, depending on the intensity of the sun, or if we believe that the poles have shifted in that the North Pole is not where the North Pole is today, but it was somewhere around Wisconsin. I mean, we're talking about a whole different shift of, people, land masses and what have you. So I don't think, to not hold on to exactly the map that we see today as being the ultimate, end all be all. I think that's important to keep in mind.
The map is not the terrain as well.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Every model is just like, it's an example of something. It may give you a good idea about something, but it's not the actual thing itself. So no matter what map you're talking about or whatever model you're talking about.
I find it interesting. There's the Denisovan subspecies of humans too, and I suppose they're not in that 7, but the Tibetans happen to have like the most trace remnants of Denisovan beings in them, and they also have that prediction I wanted to mention before of when the wheel comes to Tibet, it'll be the end of their current phase of culture. So yeah, the Denisovan strand is interesting. I wonder, Lisa, if you know about that.
So they just found recently there's a Denisovan discovery that was just made out of Siberia. It was a 40,000-year-old bracelet was found, very well crafted and circular to go along with that, what you're saying. And if you look up Denisovans, I mean, they look like cave people, like some of the drawings I've seen. They wouldn't, cave people don't make bracelets like this. So
yeah, I think also is that, I mean, I don't like 100% die on the hill of $7 of Eve. There's just a theory. It's just, what the genetic experiment showed at the time when the theory was published. But the other thing is, I think we have to look at, like, you look at bears, polar bears, black bears, whatever. The polar bear is going to be extremely different than the black bear down in Texas, but they are Ursa, of genus. And I think that they are adapted to their environment. They have to be, otherwise they're not going to survive. And so when you're looking at the peoples of Siberia, they would have to be larger. They would have to be caveman-esque, because in order to, increase in surface area increases survivability. Versus, in Central America, I'll say it, native, indigenous, we're shorter, the earth, or whatever, and smaller and more adaptable to that type of environment. So, and like what Tyrone was saying, I mean, there are many, what's it called? It's not just Homo sapien. There's been Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Homo. I mean, it just, the list goes on and on and on. And I think this is where you see the mixing of the different genus species to ultimately get where we are today. So I would agree. The Denisovians do not look anything like, let's say, people from Central America or the Toltecs. They were saying that the Toltecs have probably the most haplogroups of all people that they've ever surveyed. So, yeah.
This is reminding me just one way of looking at things symbolically. Some polar, I guess, advocates, enthusiasts, whatever, have mentioned this idea that the world tree in the polar age had 7 branches, but in the solar age it has 12, which I think is kind of interesting and symbolically at least relevant.
Well, weren't you saying that there were 7 constellations closer to the pole back in the polar age?
Yeah, I've heard several ways of it being put. I've heard that there's 7 stationed zodiac close to the pole star, also 8 constellations around the pole star. And the example I usually bring up, this is probably what you're thinking of, but in one of my resources, the guy was making the claim that there were 8 constellations around the pole star in the polar age, and this was in China, and that each constellation was emblematic of one of the trigrams of the I Ching. There's 8 trigrams, 64 hexagrams. And then when people became more solar over time, for whatever reason, that those 8 constellations shifted to the path of the sun, and then they added 4 more constellations, making 12 constellations.
Ethan,
So,
I'm throwing it to you. Get it. Grab it. That was for you.
What? I don't know.
I thought you were the Lord of the Trigrams.
I don't know. Oh, well, I don't know too much about it, but it is based on, it's the 8 multiplied by putting 2 different trigrams together. So that results in the 64 potentials. So I mean, it starts in the Taoist theory. It really goes from what is quite simple when you explain it verbally and mathematically, if you will. But everything starts with the Wu Ji, or the nothing, and it transforms from these 2. You could look at them as polar forces, and that being the yin and yang, and that expands into 4 forces: the major and minor yin and yang forces. And as time went on, the trigrams were developed, and that's considered, it goes around the Tai Chi, or rather what we call the yin yang symbol is the Tai Chi, which means the grand ultimate polarity, which is interesting to this whole phenomenon. And then that resulted in, with the 8 trigrams with the I Ching, it puts 2 trigrams together, resulting in the 6 lines, if you will, and the 64 potentials. Jin said something earlier that I thought was really interesting. The combining of these 2 forces in an axial and cyclical combination. I don't know, in those symbols that you shared, it might have been in there, but the quartered circle comes to mind as being
yes.
a really powerful kind of, the combination of the axial and cyclical. But the Taoist Bagua system with that is the set of hexagrams and trigrams. It's really all about the I Ching, which is a great reading to explore esoteric symbolism, primal symbolism, really.
right. You just have to mention the fact too. Whoop. Okay, I think I cut out. I'm probably back. But just symbols that rotate, the wheel, the classic yin yang, right, symbol, which my understanding too is I think that the primordial way, the ancient traditional way, is counterclockwise once again, which is interesting. And then also the Cancer glyph also looks like it's going counterclockwise, not clockwise. And so it's all the spin of heaven, in my opinion, right? The spin of life, of all things.
The dice.
You spin dreidels too.
Yep, there you go. Which I've heard actually started off as a German thing. That dreidels were more of a German thing, and then German Jews adopted it. That's my understanding of things. You know what? Have you guys ever looked into dreidel symbolism, by the way?
I'm not.
No, but I've been interested.
I don't know if this is, I mean, again, if they adopted it or kind of, took it for themselves or whatever, cultural appropriation, whatever. I heard one rabbi breaking it down. I think this is so telling that the way he broke it down, the esoteric symbolism of the dreidel, is that each side of the dreidel has a different Hebrew letter. Each side of the dreidel represents one of Israel's enemies, and that they constantly are on guard because they're always surrounded by people that want to kill them, pretty much, and that they consider themselves to be the center of the earth. And so the dreidel spins just like a top, right? And so it is an axial symbol, but the way they perceived it, at least according to this rabbi, is that it's all of their enemies, constant enemies surrounding them, pretty much. So
That makes
for
so
what
much
it's
sense.
Wow.
Very paranoid.
Whoa.
Yo, right? Who
Yeah.
even wants to like live thinking like that? Fuck.
So I had my favorite Nazi symbolism pulled up here.
Oh, okay.
So
It was a
my
joke.
guy, Gotz von Berlichingen. And
Okay.
let me pull him up here.
I gotta make this quick because Myra's got to bounce. Sorry.
Yeah. So Gotz lived in the 1500s, and he got his arm blown off by a cannonball. And he was a mercenary soldier who fashioned for himself a fully articulated metal arm. And so they called him Gotz of the Metal Arm. And he is known for the Swabian salute, which is lick me in my asshole. And so Beethoven actually wrote a whole symphony for the Swabian salute, which was him shaking his metal arm at this lord who was trying to invade his castle. So the Nazis decided that this guy was their guy. So they created a whole battalion, the 17th battalion, or 17th SS Grenadier Battalion. So these guys were representing Gotz von Berlichingen in the Nazi wars. But what's really interesting is the connection to this completely different Japanese anime, right? So there was a...
Oh, we lost them.
Let me see. There we go. So have you ever heard of the book called, or the anime called Berserk? It's about this dude who's got a metal arm who lives in this sort of, I guess, medieval age, right? And so his name is Gotz, and he's talking about, basically, let me take this off the stage. There we go. So somehow this fully articulated metal arm guy who wields a sword, because that's what he built his arm for, so he could hold a sword in it, strangely enough. But Guts from the book Berserk is exactly like this German character, and they're separated by hundreds of years, and there's actually no connection between the guy who wrote Berserk and Gotz von Berlichingen. So it's strange that this same sort of energy reverberates over all these distant miles and years with seemingly no connection. Just thought that was interesting.
Got somebody showing up with fake arms. We better watch out. Fuck. I mean,
But yeah, I mean,
that happened.
he was that guy was a folk hero. He constructed a metal arm for himself. I mean, there's so much imagery in there. You got Evil Dead. The guy saws off his arm and then builds himself a new one. You know,
chainsaw on the end of it.
right?
Ash, that's great. I think we're gonna wrap it up.
Yep.
Was Mario still here or not? Maybe he had to leave. There he is. Mario, please let everybody know where they can find all your amazing work, sir.
Yeah, of course. Symbolicstudies.com. If people are interested in tarot readings or study sessions, private lessons, things like that, they can hit me up. Definitely check out my Instagram. I think that's one of my best platforms just to get my stuff, because I post a lot of short videos and all of that. So anyways, thanks for having me, guys. I honestly really respect this group, and I always learn something new, and you guys just always bring it. So this was a good time. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Yeah, so we got to do another planet again eventually. I don't know which one we're up to next. Yes,
sure.
We'll definitely continue to work with each other. Thank you very much, Mary. It's always an awesome show. Always a good presentation. Everybody else, their links are in the bottom. Thank you very much for joining the show. That's what's up. Everybody in the chat, thank you. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.
All right, guys.